Our reading for Rosh HaShana, and I call the name of this little talk that we're about to have, Defining the True Meaning of Altruism. Defining True Altruism. And you'll see why in just a second. Listen to this story while we're getting our sheets. I've been going to the same bagel coffee shop every Sunday for years. One morning in the middle of a great, dreary, drizzly weekend, I trudged in, dripping wet with my newspaper carefully tucked under my overcoat, and ordered my usual bagel with lox and cream cheese and an espresso. I was casually informed that my coffee had already been paid for. I looked around expecting to see some friend sitting somewhere, but didn't. And when I asked, the young woman at the register just smiled and said, "Someone paid for 20 coffees, and you are number 8. I sat there for almost an hour, reading my paper and watching more surprised people come in to find their morning coffee prepaid. There we all were, furtively at first, and then with big funny smiles on our faces, looking at everyone else in the restaurant, trying to figure out who had done this incredible thing, but mostly just enjoying the experience as a group. It was a beautiful blast of sunshine on an otherwise overcast winter day." What a beautiful story. Something that you'd find probably in one of those chicken soup books. Right? So, but that's the definition of altruism. In other words, I do it, I remain totally anonymous, and I just want to give something to other people that I don't even know. Guy paid for the person or lady paid for, a man or lady paid for the coffee, walked out of the shop. And Matan Baseter, but not just for tzedakah. He just wanted to do something nice for other people. I think that perhaps one of the messages that we can pull out of the Torah reading for Rosh HaShana is how to define altruism. And let's take a look at one of on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we have the Torah reading begins with the words "V'Hashem pakad et Sarah ka'asher amar," that God visited Sarah as He had promised. Vayas Hashem l'Sarah ka'asher diber, and God did for Sarah as He had said that He would. And we know that one of the reasons why we read this portion on Rosh Hashanah is because this happened, that God allowed Sarah to conceive on Rosh Hashanah itself. This is when Hashem fulfilled His promise to Avraham and Sarah that Sarah would bear yet a child. And we're told that Sarah was not the only one whose prayers were answered in Rosh Hashanah. Yosef's answers were prayed, he was freed from prison on Rosh Hashanah. Hannah's answers were prayed, and she was allowed to bear a child in Rosh Hashanah as well. So a number of great tzaddikim had their prayers answered on Rosh Hashanah. So that's one reason why we read about this on Rosh Hashanah, as the Meforshim point out. But take a look at this very interesting Rashi. Rashi tells us that immediately before this pasuk in the Torah, we are told about another story. It is a story about the king Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, who was stricken with a terrible plague on his household because he had taken Sarah into his home. And he apologizes to Avraham and asks Avraham to pray on his behalf and on behalf of his household. Ki atzar Hashem ba'ad kol rechem beveis Avimelech, because God had sealed off every womb in the house of Avimelech as a punishment for Avraham taking Sarah. Avraham goes ahead and davens for Avimelech, sorry. So Avraham goes ahead and davens for Avimelech and his household, and through this tzaddik's prayers, Hashem heals all of the women in Avimelech's household, and they're able to become fertile once again. So Rashi tells us, Samach parsha zu lekan lamedcha. The reason why these sections are next to each other is to teach me, shekol hamevakesh rachamim al chavero, that if you ask for mercy for your friend, v'hu tzarich le'oto davar, and you need the very same thing that your friend needs, but instead of asking for yourself, you ask for your friend instead, hu na'anat chila, that you'll be answered first. In other words, So let's just think of some generic example. I need widgets for my business, but my friend needs widgets for his business too. So instead of davening to Hashem, please give me widgets, I say, my friend Yankel needs widgets, please Hashem send Yankel widgets. And in reward for my prayer for Yankel, Hashem will send me the widgets first, instead of giving them to Yankel.
What is the widget?
I could have said doodads. It's just something, right? Whatever it is, right? Right? It's just a azach, whatever it is. Whatever you need, okay? Fill in the blank. Okay? All right, so let's, Shenemar Vayispalel, as it says that Avraham davened for Avimelech, so that there should be fertility in Avimelech's household. And the Samichle, and right afterwards it says, Vashem pakad et Sarah, that Hashem visited Sarah, shepakad kevar kodem shiripei et Avimelech. The word pakad, instead of saying vayifkod, which would imply sequentially after Hashem blessed Avimelech, Hashem blessed Sarah, it doesn't say vayifkod, but rather it says Vashem pakad. That conjugation of the verb in that form implies that this was already something that had been previously done even before the story was finished with Avimelech. That Hashem immediately answered Avram's prayers for Avimelech, but before making Avimelech's house fertile, he made Sarah fertile because Avram davened selflessly for Avimelech. Yes?
The question is selflessly. Is this really altruistic prayer?
Well, it depends what you already know, right? In other words, if I already know, and this is what I want to discuss today, if I already know that by davening for Yankel's widgets that God's going to answer and give me widgets first, so then it sort of defeats the whole purpose, right, doesn't it? Yeah? And so that's something that we have to try and understand. There's a related question to that. There's a medrash, and I have that at the bottom of the page. Source number 5, the Pesikta Zutrasa says as follows, that when Moshe kept demurring the appointment of being the leader and the redeemer of the Jewish people, Chazal tell us that we learn something very important from that principle, that Kol haboreach min hasirara, sirara rodefes acharav. That anyone who runs away from leadership and honor and glory will pursue that person and finally be granted to that person. So they say there's a famous story that one of the students of the Chidushei Harim once went over to his Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I don't understand. My whole life I've been running away from honor and from leadership. And leadership has never caught up with me. Can you explain to me why? So the Chidushei Harim said, it's very simple. Because Sarara, this leadership quality, noticed that every few miles you were looking over your shoulder. So he got scared and he never pursued you and never caught up with you. So obviously, what does this mean? It means that if you're doing it with the intent of, let me run away from honor, so hopefully honor will run after me, then that's not called running away from honor. So, but we'll get to that in a second. Let me just ask another question. And I've noticed this question as some of the Meforshim ask, that later on in the very same Torah reading in source number 3, it says, in the story of Hagar and Yishmael, which is, again, part of the story of the Torah reading on the first day of Rosh HaShana, that after Hagar and Yishmael have been banished from Sarah and Avraham's home, it says, Vatelech vateshiv la mineged, harchek kimetacha vekeshes, that she sits far at a distance, ki amra al ebemos hayolet, because she says, I don't want to see my son perish. Vateshiv mineged vatisoes kolav atevk. And she sat at a distance, and she started to wail. And then the next pasuk says, Vayishma Elokim es kol hanar, that Hashem heard the sound of crying from the youth, from Yishmael. It doesn't say that Hashem heard the cries of Hagar. It says that Hashem heard the cries of Yishmael. And Rashi makes an important note of this based on a Gemara. And Rashi says, Mikan, from here we learn, sheyafe tefilas hachoyle mitefilas hacherim alav. From here you learn that the prayer of the sick person himself or herself has more efficacy, is more effective than the prayer of someone else who was praying for them. If a person is ill and they pray for themselves, that's a more powerful tefillah than if someone else prays for the sick person. Vehi kodemes lehis kabel, and it'll be answered first. And that's why when Hashem heard Yishmael crying, he answered his prayers because he was crying for himself, whereas Hagar was crying for her son. Now this seems to be a direct contradiction to what we just learned, right? And this is Rashi. We just read two Rashis in the same chapter that are almost completely opposite, right? Are you with me? The first Rashi says that if you daven for someone else and you need that same thing, then your prayers will be answered first. And here Rashi says, no, just the opposite. If you need something and you daven for yourself, that's a more powerful prayer than when someone else davens for you. So the question is, how do we reconcile this? What's that?
Comparing apples and oranges, because in one case, Hagar's not the one who's sick. Yishmael's the one who's sick. The other cases, both people have the same affliction, and then one...
Okay, that's certainly one way of looking at it, but after all, wasn't Hagar also out in the wilderness?
No, but she wasn't sick. She was such a person. That was one who died. She must have been sick at heart.
But she was starving. I mean, she was going to perish just as well. If she would have been left out in the desert, she would have stayed with him. She would have died also. Okay, but maybe that's one approach. I'm not discounting that. But I think that we could perhaps answer with an answer that will help us understand why there's a deeper reason why we're reading this on Rosh HaShana. Altruism is one of the most godly attributes, and it's the way that we most resemble Hashem when we do things completely without a sense of ego, without a sense of self. And scientists don't even understand why we do things altruistically. There was a study that I read a few years back about what parts of the brain are stimulated when people give charity, right? Because scientists really want to understand from, the psychobiology, how do we understand what motivates people to do things when there's no benefit to themselves? What dopamine is stimulated in the brain when people do an act of selfless charity, right? And it would seem that from a religious standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, man is connecting with his Tselem Elokim the most, with the image of God that he was created with, when he acts like God, when he emulates his Creator. Imitatio Dei is the way they say it in Latin. When you imitate Hashem, right, that's when you most feel gratified, because you are triggering that sense of Tselem Elokim within yourself. But true altruism, real altruism, is that I acknowledge that I'm not the issue here. Whatever happens to me is of no consequence, because there is a greater purpose to existence other than my own needs. That's the definition of altruism. And the reason why the principle of if you daven for someone else, your prayers will be answered first, is because once I reach that level of selflessness, that it's really, I'm not important, everything around me is more important than I am, then Hashem is much more likely to give me what I need, simply because this will enable me to continue the work that I was created for. Once I demonstrate that I am capable of doing God's work by emulating God, Hashem says, then you deserve to live. So even if I may be aware that if I daven for someone else, Hashem may help me, if that's my objective, then it won't work, because that's no longer altruism. I have to really genuinely feel that what happens to me in life, whether I live or die, whether I'm sick or healthy, is not really important. God's will is important. Whatever Hashem wants in the world is important. My understanding is that Hashem wants people to be davened for. If I can play a role in helping someone else's refuah, then that's my role that I have to play, and I will be godlike in trying to get other people to have their situations ameliorated in this world. And therefore, I choose to daven for others. And what happens to me is that's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the attitude that a person has in order to be able to be worthy of having Hashem recognize that I play an important role in His world. But again, the focus cannot be on me. Just like when a person flees from leadership, the focus can't be on when's leadership going to catch up with me, because that's not called fleeing from leadership. That's called trying to get a hold of leadership. So it's not like a magical formula. It's actually a statement of what the definition of altruism is. And I think that that might be one of the most important, and therefore we can understand that the difference between Hagar and the story of Avraham and Sarah, Avraham's prayers, Avraham recognized that whether Sarah has a child or not, that's not up to me, and that doesn't make a difference. I know that my role in life is to be God's representative, and therefore I daven for Avimelech and his household. And that's why Avraham was responded to first, because he validated Hashem's belief in him as being the leader of the Jewish people. And that's why he deserved to have his prayers answered. But when you, but the case of Hagar, Hagar's cries were not altruistic cries. She didn't want to see her child perish. So her cry was therefore as selfish as was Yishmael's. What parent would want to be near Yishmael, right, in that situation? And so her crying was a personal pain, and so it was as selfish as Yishmael's, and therefore Yishmael's cries were more effective because he was davening for himself. He felt his own pain more than Hagar did. So that's why the cases are not comparable. And I think that's one of the reasons why we daven, or we say this Torah portion on Rosh HaShana. What we're essentially doing is you know that on Rosh HaShana, there is nothing in Rosh HaShana about personal petitions. We don't daven for ourselves on Rosh HaShana. As a matter of fact, there is an aversion that's discussed among the commentaries to start focusing on yourself and your own needs on Rosh HaShana. That's not to say that you shouldn't ask at all for your needs on Rosh HaShana. There is a place for that as well. But the main avoda, the main focus of Rosh HaShana is to be Mamlich HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to declare Hashem to be king. And based on this very first Rashi of the very first pasuk of the Torah reading on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, what we're doing is reaffirming that the reason why I haven't been davening today for myself, Hashem, is because I'm not what it's all about. The focus of existence, of reality, is not what my fate's going to be for the coming year, but rather, thy will be done. We want Hashem, your world, to be in its perfected state. That's why you brought us into existence, is so that we can contribute to a larger purpose, far larger than what happens to me in life. And that's the reason why I read the first story of Hashem delivering a child to Sarah. Because if I can prove to you, Hashem, that I really care about your will more than I care about my own needs, then I will become worthy of the blessings of the coming year. Because then you will know, Hashem, that whatever you give me is not being used for selfish purposes, but is being used in your service. So we can't get to Yom Kippur before going through a Rosh Hashanah. We have to make sure that we understand why we deserve to live for the coming year, why we deserve to be blessed for the coming year. We deserve it because we understand that whatever I receive in life is a way for me to serve Hashem and to fulfill His will in this world. So we should all be zocha to aksiva ve-chatima tova. Let's all have a good gebenched year and be worthy of the blessings that Hashem is waiting for us.